later, but
Right. Yes.
I can talk about it briefly. Okay.
Okay. Okay. Okay. Okay. Okay.
Are you asking us to turn our cameras off?
Whichever is comfortable for you. Um, at the beginning, I would like you to have your camera on and then just see your faces. Then you can go to your screenshot your name until it's your turn. But when we get ready to have questions and answers, I would like everyone to have the camera back on. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Good morning and welcome to the School of Social and Behavioral Sciences uh, week. And today we will be looking at restorative justice. And as you can see, as participants, you will not be able to speak or be seen on camera, but there's a chat feature that is available for you to post questions or comments as we go along. When we look at the issue of restorative justice, many are not really aware of what that means. And I will not be going to detail. I have wonderful panelists who will provide you with an overview, a definition, and various ways that is implemented. When you look at the basic characteristics, it looks at the issues of repair, encounter, and transformation. So keep those thoughts in mind. And with all the things that have happened over the last few years, last summer, and with the incident on January the 6th at the Capitol, and what has followed since then, I'm sure for many of y'all in the current trial occurring right now, I'm sure many of y'all may have an idea, a question, or want to know, well, what and how does restorative justice work? Okay. We will have um, students from Sociology 101 who will be introducing our panelists. Ms. Tori Graves, Ms. Adriana Parra, Tim Murph, and Savannah Suki. And I will turn this over to Tori.
I'm sorry. Hello. Good morning. I thought my mic was on. So I will be introducing Miss Susan Cherry, Susan Cherry, Executive Director of the Community Restorative Justice Center from Vermont. And she's restorative justice, she restorative justice system.
Okay, thank you, Tori.
Do I need to go ahead and read about, okay.
Yes.
Okay, so Professor Aparna Polavarapu founded the South Carolina Restorative Justice Initiative in 2020. She has over a decade of experience working in human rights and can be promoted and inhibited by informal justice system. Through her work in sub-Saharan Africa, Aparna came to understand and respect the contributions of community-driven justice practice. More recently, she has worked with local partners to promote and develop restorative justice practices in South Carolina. Aparna is also an associate professor at the University of South Carolina School of Law. Her research has covered a wide range of topics, including the use of restorative justice mechanisms, to combat domestic violence in Uganda, and how customary and statutory law interact to govern land rights in sub-Saharan Africa.
So,
Is that my cue?
yes.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Tori.
You're welcome.
I'm going to, I know that we have such a great array of panelists and, everyone needs to have a chance to speak. So I'm going to give a very brief overview of my work with the South Carolina Restorative Justice Initiative. I'm just going to share my screen briefly. And just a sort of theoretical overview of restorative justice. And before I keep going, can I just get a thumbs up? We have a good screen share? It's working? Okay, good. All right, so as Tori said, I am the executive director and founder of the South Carolina Restorative Justice Initiative, and I'm also an associate professor at the University of South Carolina School of Law. I founded SCRJI in 2020, like late summer, early fall, to respond to an unmet need in South Carolina for education and support in developing restorative practices. So through my ongoing work and communications with direct service providers and community activists across the state over the past several years, it became apparent that there was a desire and an interest to implement restorative alternatives to traditional modes of response to problems of justice. But what was missing is a support network that could equip providers with the knowledge and resources to confidently begin integrating restorative practices into their own work. So I created a CRJI to fill that gap. And with the help of my advisory board, I developed this and also developed the goals that sort of make up our mission, right? And these are to educate and promote dialogue in South Carolina about the concepts of restorative and transformative justice, to facilitate the development of community-based restorative justice mechanisms, and to develop publicly available educational materials to support efforts within and outside of South Carolina. So I want to talk a little bit about what I even mean when I talk about restorative justice. So I have what I call an imperfect graphic, and I'm actually going to back up away from it for a minute before I actually talk about why this is here and why it's imperfect. So when I'm talking about restorative justice, because of the space I come from, I'm often talking about response to a discrete harm. There are also the principles that animate restorative justice also animate restorative practice. Right? And so there are many ways that you can engage in restorative practice that are more about maintenance or prevention or peace building, and less about having an immediate response to a harm that has been committed. Right? But what I'm about to talk to you about is that immediate response to a harm that's been committed. I just think it's really important for me to make that distinction right now. Restorative justice views harm differently than our criminal legal system does. So there are a number of issues in our criminal legal system. One, we operate in a binary. We understand people as being like victims or perpetrators. And within our adversarial system, we have pretty strict control, or lawyers attempt to have very strict control over how a story is told, over the narrative of the wrong that's been committed. And it's very, very focused on punishment, right? So restorative justice shifts the view on that. So restorative justice asks about the harm. How do we repair the harm, right? Rather than emphasizing that a law has been broken, restorative justice looks at the harm that is committed. In our criminal legal system, we say, what law has been broken? What's the prescribed punishment? And I want to here point out, right, I'm using these words very deliberately because harm is not the same thing as crime. Crime is just based on what the law is that has been written by humans. Restorative justice views crime as a violation of the relationship between the person who has committed that harm and the community. And to repair that, because this is really, excuse me, about repairing harm, restorative justice, right, draws from indigenous and global forms of justice and conceptualizes a process that involves the person or persons who committed the harm, the person or persons who were harmed, and the community coming together. And the outcome, the desired outcome, is accountability. I'm going to come back to that word in a minute, because accountability is really, really important here. But first I want to talk about like where we've seen this before, because I think it's really important for us to acknowledge the roots of restorative practice and restorative justice. This isn't something that just came out of the minds of, just some Americans a few decades ago and then was implemented. This draws a lot, like I said, from indigenous practice, from global traditional practice. We have seen it more recently being implemented in the form of transitional justice in a lot of post-conflict countries. A commonly referenced approach to restorative justice in the transitional context is in post-apartheid South Africa with the development of truth and reconciliation commissions. But we've also seen this in other societies in traditional justice. And that's actually how I came to really embrace restorative justice. I have some relationship with it through my own culture and background as a woman of Indian descent, but also because of my work in sub-Saharan Africa, seeing informal systems of justice work, seeing systems of justice that are operating under these, with the same principles of repairing the harm, right? And seeing how they've worked. That's really brought me to this space here in the United States. And in fact, like in the United States, there are a number of peacemaking circles that draw directly from Navajo practices. New Zealand is often cited as one of the forerunners of the modern restorative justice movement, but they developed their conferencing circles, the conferencing practice, by adapting Maori practices. And so we have seen this before, and this has deep, deep roots. All right. So what does this mean, right? What does restorative justice look like in the case of individual level wrongs? When someone's committed a harm, what does it look like to bring these three different groups together? Well, I mean, it can look any number of ways. There's no perfect blueprint, but some common approaches we've seen are conferences. And that's actually what I saw being implemented in Uganda in the form of reconciliation to respond to domestic violence. And essentially it's bringing the parties, the people who've committed the harm and who have been affected by it to the table. And oftentimes also bringing affected community members, community stakeholders who have an interest. In Uganda with domestic violence, I did see family members come to the table. I saw community elders come to the table, anyone who had an interest or who the parties involved felt like could help support a better outcome. Something that's not on here, actually, and that's an error of mine, is face-to-face dialogue or victim-offender dialogue. It's another type of conferencing, but it's different in the sense that we're often talking just about the people who've been affected by the harm. And this, to go back to my graphic, one of the reasons I call this an imperfect graphic is because you don't always have these three groups at the table. So victim offender dialogue, sometimes what you have is really just the victim and the offender. And again, now I'm using the words victim and offender because victim offender dialogue is often directly connected to the criminal system. You probably, if you've heard of it, you've probably heard of it used with people who've already been incarcerated. But that doesn't include bringing in large groups of community members, right, in that context, for a number of pragmatic reasons, and also the prison's not going to let them in. real briefly, and I understand I'm going through this very quickly, and I'm happy to answer questions about any of this later. Circles are another common form of restorative practice. There are numerous ways of engaging in circles. Some of the circle practices I've seen typically have sort of consistent circle members or trained circle volunteers, community volunteers to address a particular harm. Again, using the example of violence, I've seen some circles used to address partner violence specifically. So in some of the circles I've seen, we've had people who are trained, especially in dealing with partner violence, and also, of course, in restorative practice. And within those circles, you will again have the responsible party as well as the people who've been affected by that violence. And the conversation that's had in the circles as well as in the conferences that I just described is one where people can talk about the ways that they've been harmed, the ways that the harm has impacted them, where the responsible parties really have to confront what they've done, right? And it's pretty different from what we see in court because it is an open narrative. There's no lawyer saying objection or that evidence can't be submitted or like relevance. People are given the space, a safe space to tell the whole story from beginning to end. Again, I have to reference my imperfect graphic because there are examples of circles where we don't always have the people who have been harmed and the people who have committed the harm together in one circle. Sometimes we'll have circles that are just for the people who have committed the harm, who are using that space to achieve accountability, to find ways to stop engaging in destructive behaviors, but where the people that they've harmed either can't be in that circle or don't want to be in that circle, for any number of reasons. So what we instead have is, other opportunities for them to gain support. So we'll also see boards less commonly. This is almost like speaking in front of a community council. But again, the idea is the same, where you're going to ask parties to, from beginning to end, tell exactly what happened from the perspective, where the people who've been harmed can talk about the ways that it's been impacted, right? And the end result for all of these is going to be to achieve accountability. And again, there are other options. So I've said accountability a bunch of times. What am I even talking about? Accountability requires that the responsible party takes responsibility for the harm that they've committed, right? That they acknowledge the impacts of their actions, that they honor the narratives of the people they've hurt, and that they make reparation. And oftentimes there's an agreement of steps they're going to take to ensure that they don't commit that harm again. This can look so many different ways depending on, who are the parties involved? What exact type of harm are we talking about? How severe is it? How often has it been committed? Right? All of those are factors that play a role in deciding what that accountability agreement should look like. And of course, the parties themselves have significant input. What do I want to see you do? What does the community need to see you do? What do you need? What kind of support does the responsible party need to actually hold themselves accountable? And I used the word reparation, which often makes people think money, but doesn't always mean money. When I say reparation, I mean repair that harm. And depending on what we're talking about, it can be as simple as an apology, a real apology. It can be something ranging from apology to work to, physically fix a harm, if that's something that is possible and is what we're talking about, to, engaging in other forms of behavior I mean, or sometimes making a payment if that's part of the reparation to help repair that harm done, to help achieve some sort of restitution. Okay. And again, I know this has been, this is a really, really brief overview, so I'm happy to answer questions about this later, but I'll just say, to summarize everything I've said, what we're really talking about is different ways of bringing together the people who are involved in the harm, and also making sure that we are also representing the community perspective so that we can achieve goals of repairing that harm in some way. A lot of people use the word healing. I don't like to so much because I think it creates expectations that can be unrealistic at times in terms of what people who have been harmed can actually get. But some form of reparation of the harm, and also some way to reintegrate that person, rather than think, let's punish them, let's throw them away, let's kick them out, right? Understanding that with proper support, most people can be reintegrated into society and learn, more productive behaviors. Okay, and I just want to close by bringing us back to SCRJI and what it's done in South Carolina. Because we, so strongly believe in the value of restorative justice, we've hit the ground running, and we're working really hard to work with partners here to develop restorative practices. So since we began, we launched a Fundamentals of Restorative Justice webinar series. Some of those are posted on our YouTube page, if any of you are interested in learning, a little bit more in depth about some of these practices. We're currently working with local partners on developing restorative practices that they can integrate into their work. And we are finding additional ways to continue to educate and support the development of restorative practice. And you can follow all of our work here. Great, and with that, I will close and turn it over to the next panelist.
Thank you.
Okay, we're not hearing anything. We need to unmute ourselves.
No. Okay. So Mr. Dr. Nakia Grimbaugh is a program specialist for Restorative Justice Ministry with Catholic Charities of South Carolina. And he'll be next.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank Midlands Tech for the invite and giving us the opportunity to present what our restorative justice program is under Catholic Charities and the Diocese of Charleston. And I look forward to what I can learn today as well, as restorative justice is quite unknown by most. So this is also a learning opportunity for me. Our restorative justice program was established under the Diocese of Charleston and operates through Catholic Charities of the Midlands. Our focus is to work directly with men and women who are currently incarcerated. So we actually have partnered with the Department of Corrections to go into the prisons and provide a minimum of 6 to 8 weeks of engagement with every man and woman that we meet and who choose us as a service for their preparation for reentry. As Professor Poronovos said, restorative justice is not about punishment. We're really trying to figure out how to give the people that we are working with the skills to then come back out into society and meet their new obligations with their families, with the community, with the people that they've hurt, and just addressing the wrongdoing that was done to repair the harm. So our process is a bit challenging because, as I said, we are working in the prisons. So we are working in an adversarial system. That's what the prison system is. And of course, adversary, that's conflict and opposition. So we are working within a system that is a bit of a challenge to bring this perspective to. We do our ministry through the connections with the community, with the families of the offenders, and our engagement with the community is really the biggest part of the ministry, because we rely on the good works and the good hearts of men and women in society to have a better understanding of who these people are beyond their crimes. And of course, working with prisons, we're not so cute, we're not so cuddly, we're not the babies, we're not the elders, we're not the animals, in the woods and the forest. So it requires some soul searching to get people connected to the need to help these people restore their lives and become more of an aid to our society instead of a detriment. We are a faith-based entity, um, but we don't mandate any religious teachings or engagement. Um, we begin our outreach with each individual, man and woman, meeting them where they are, making sure that they understand that they have served their time, they prayerfully have done their penance or penitence in regards to repenting and preparing for uh, going back out into society. Um, and unfortunately, the prison system, which was originally established as penitentiaries, that was the focus, to help these men and women understand and acknowledge their wrongdoings and come back out as better citizens. But we all know that that is not the total outcome. So we go inside to try to make sure that we make those connections. Uh, we do our engagement through what we call the corporal works of mercy, corporal and spiritual. We try to make sure that there are actually hands-on engagement with each person, sitting side by side, face to face. Um, as the professor said, we're looking to relink them to the families that they may have harmed. But the harm goes beyond just the people directly. It's also their own families that were victimized by their actions. So rebuilding those family relationships, reconnecting to society to seek forgiveness and pay whatever debt is still due, uh, and making sure that they are at a place where they are ready to do that. So a lot of our work is, as I said, face to face, to make sure that we help them map out a um, a plan that is ideal for them as an individual to move forward in their lives. So our engagement is very hands-on. Uh, we provide supports on 4 basic levels, because in working with the community, we've seen so many programs be established that do so much for the program development, but the individual is still at the level they were when they went into the facilities. So they're not coming out and taking advantage of these programs. So we look at those who are indigent and who will have no resources. We look at those who were homeless before they went into prison and will definitely be homeless coming out of prison. We want to make sure that every man and woman has the ability to rebuild their lives by taking ownership again of their names. They've got to reclaim their names. Most don't have an ID. And as you all know, if you don't have a basic ID, you cannot be employed. You cannot be housed. You cannot go to treatment. So our focus initially with every person is to help them rebuild their foundations, making sure that they have their birth certificate, social security card, and a basic state ID. And then from there, making sure that no one is preparing to leave these state or federal facilities and end up living on the streets of whatever state or city that their homes are in. And in a lot of cases, we really challenge the people we support and sponsor not to go home, because home is where the problems begin. So it is a challenge for most to move forward beyond their homes and their families and just going back to what they know. But as we all know, what we know, if we don't learn any different, we are inclined to repeat the same situations over and over. So we do a bit of pressing to make sure that those who are indigent and at risk of homelessness don't choose to go back home just because that's home. They've got to go back with a plan. Um, Information is power. So we work directly with each individual again to make sure that they have as much information about the areas they're going to, the services they need, and to pretty much become a little selfish initially, because before they can take on the world, they've got to shore themselves up. They've got to make sure that they can carry the weight of reconnecting with family, of becoming a parent again, of going back into their mother and father's homes. So a lot of information uh, is provided to each individual regarding resources through our state government, our local governments, and through just standard providers in the communities. Uh, and then beyond that, we put a great focus on advocating for systems changes, because if we do well for one and help that one person move ahead, whatever that one thing that held him back or her back, if we don't also try to address that issue, that stays prevalent for the 100 plus that are coming out with them. So we also look at what systems changes need to happen, and we work with our local governments to, as I said, we work to make sure that the basic essentials are in place. So birth certificates for in-state and out-of-state residents, housing, that people just cannot meet to support people in prison. It's a to make sure that people
Thank you. I'm sorry we had a little breakage there at the end. That was very informative. I am going to have Tim Murphy read a brief bio about our next presenter. She was having technical difficulties and is still trying to get on. So Tim.
Hello. I'll be presenting Ms. Sharon. Gotcha.
Tim, turn your speaker down and try again.
I'm gonna let him.
I'll be presenting Ms. Sharon H. Martain. She resides in Columbia, South Carolina, and is a graduate of Claflin University with a Bachelor of Arts degree in Criminal Justice. She is a district captain with the South Carolina Department of Mental Health Public Safety Division. She has been in law enforcement for 34 years, working her way up from a public safety officer to the role she presently serves. She has served in this role as a district captain for 14 years. Her goal is to continue to be a visionary in this field and to be a positive and productive role model to all officers she comes in contact with. She has created a virtual AAA program so employees can still remain in compliance with the agency requirement while working from home. Her hobbies are reading and researching better ways to make her area run more effectively each and every day. Some of the challenges that she has encountered is getting administrators to buy into her vision for the law
My
enforcement.
apologies, my computer went out.
For the law enforcement aspect of the job and the areas they serve.
We always have to be prepared. I do know the basis of her speech was to look at how restorative justice can assist those who may have mental health issues. And she was looking at that by the integration through reliable viable work, and something that will provide them with a focus. I will turn it over to Ms. Tori Graves. No, hold on. Yes, Ms. Tori Graves.
Okay, next I will be introducing Ms. Susan Cherry, Executive Director, the Community Restorative Justice Center Incorporation, and her topic will be Vermont Restorative Justice System.
Hello, it's great to be with you all today. Wondering if you can see that. Okay, good. I just want to share a little bit about what Vermont went through in bringing restorative justice as a policy for the state of Vermont. Our Department of Corrections is actually under the Agency of Human Services because Vermont has taken the opinion that looking at corrections really is a human-centered system. And so I'm just going to bring you up to speed with what Vermont has done, because Professor Aparna did tell you a lot about restorative justice as a general object. So back in the early 1990s, Vermont was facing overcrowding and was facing budget issues with the Department of Corrections. And we had some influential folks in the department at that time that were really looking at what can we do to avoid the kinds of issues that would, either we would have to build more prisons or we're gonna have to change the system. And so we looked at the indigenous systems of justice and were inspired by some of the systems that we saw. We looked at Australia and Canberra, and we looked in the Maoris, the Maori people in New Zealand, and the Mennonite communities in Canada. What we decided to do was to do a survey of folks in Vermont to find out what the public wanted. And so we hired John Doble of Doble and Associates to do a full study. And we found that the people really wanted to have a system of safety. They weren't interested in punishment as much as people fixing what went wrong and repairing harm. And we found in our Vermont Constitution that the repairing of harm was actually in statute. So we started there and we said, okay, so repairing harm to the community is already built into our guidelines and our Constitution. Let's start with that. And how do we give judges more options rather than just the options that they have? So they really revamped all of the Department of Corrections. The end result is that we have community justice centers now that are supported by state funding throughout the state of Vermont. And these community justice centers have a full range of options. In my justice center here in St. Johnsbury, we really have embraced the central core object of restorative justice, which is basically shame, the committing of harm, separates you from not only your community, but your relationships. And restorative justice is a mechanism that brings people together. Part of our studying of some of the indigenous cultures were that what holds communities together are the stories and the rituals. So if we could provide a place for people to tell their story in a safe and a way that invites their story generously, then we would also be able to have a welcoming back or a welcoming sort of a ritual that would also be part of the, we understand what you did, tell us more, what does the community need and how do we repair this harm? And through the efforts of some of the work that was being done at the University of Vermont, put in a lot more victim input and people who actually were harmed as part of the process. We've evolved over the last 20 years to now having neighborhood associations where people can have dialogue, some in circle process, in some way just talking about the hard things that we need to talk about. Our neighborhood associations became started because we had folks coming back into the community out of incarceration and the community was getting upset. So we said, let's bring everybody together and talk. So that's how our neighborhood associations started, and we now have them throughout our communities. We also get referrals from our municipal offices. We don't have a county government system in the state of Vermont. We have municipalities. So we had to go to the municipalities to say, you know, are you buying into this? So our referrals here at the Justice Center come from zoning. It might come from landlord disputes. It might come from folks who are needing assistance. We have over 90 volunteers that work with us in the community because the community is so critical to what we do. So we surveyed the community. The community said we trust the community. We want the community to be involved in justice, and so we have these opportunities in our justice centers to do that. We might get a referral for a mediation from law enforcement. We might get a referral to our restorative justice or community panels. So we have 7 community panels that meet throughout the month. And we have about 5 volunteers on each community panel. We might get a referral directly from the law enforcement agency. And if they complete the panel successfully, they never will go to court. So we're keeping people out of the court system that way. They might go to court and get a conviction that has the condition of probation that they would need to go to a restorative justice panel. And our restorative justice panels would hear their case and would involve the victim, and we would figure out a way to repair the harm. And they come back and share what they did to our community panel, and the panel would say, well done. And where shame separates people from the community, this is a welcoming back. This is saying, we see what you did, nicely done, and that we have the affected parties part of that conversation so that we get the input from everybody in the community as well as the affected parties. And our victim liaison meets with the people who were affected directly by the harm and either sits with them during the panel or represents them during the panel. The biggest piece of our community justice system really right now is also our circles of support and accountability, where people who are coming out of incarceration are referred for a COSA, Circles of Support and Accountability. We have community members who sit with our folks that are reentering the community every single week for at least a year. We have several COSAs that are longer than a year. If you're interested in hearing more about the COSA program, which we learned from the Mennonite community in Canada, the Vermont COSA program is well documented. If you go to the Department of Corrections website in Vermont, there's a documentary called Coming Home, and I highly recommend that. It shares with you the reentry work that we're doing with our community members to welcome people back into the community by sitting with them every single week while they're in community. One of the biggest things that Vermont did was to change the system of sentencing so that, as I mentioned, judges had more options. We have community furlough. So when people are coming back into the community, rather than maxing out their sentence in the incarcerative facility, they're brought into the community under supervision. And if they're referred to a COSA, they have both the supervision of their parole officer with them, as well as the supervision of community members, watching them, working with them, being part of a team with them. It's really wrapping that relationship. You've heard a lot about from Nikki and his work in the prisons themselves. It's about building relationship. You build relationship to help people figure out that they do have something to offer, that they do have a way of entry back into the community, and sometimes for the first time feeling like they belong someplace. And you don't get that from the hierarchical structures of government. You get that from the grassroots structures of community. And that's what we provide. Our volunteers are trained by the Department of Corrections. We have a great training program that we offer all of our volunteers. Our free legal clinic has 15 lawyers that offer their services pro bono. And our volunteers are amazing people that want to give back to their community in a way that keeps the community safe. Which, going back to that survey that they did, they said we trust the community to be the mechanism of keeping us safe so that we don't have people recommitting those crimes. They've done a study throughout Vermont. How has this been affected? Did we do a good job in getting this established? And they found that people who go through restorative justice processes in the state of Vermont are 3 times more likely to succeed in the community. So their program's 3 times better than the Department of Corrections programming that they would have. So the neurology of that is when people hear from the folks that were most affected by harm, what they did and what they've experienced in that harm, people are more likely to actually change their behavior. So that victim input, the community input, and the work with the community members to repair the harm, to have people actually hear that they're welcome, that they've repaired the harm, that they're welcome back into the community with the community support, really does make a difference, not only in brain science, but also in the studies done by the Crime Research Group in the state of Vermont. So we are 3 times more likely to see success than just through regular DOC programming. So my contact information is here. If you would like to know more about what we're doing in Vermont, I'd be glad to answer any questions as well. And thank you very much.
So the next is Cynthia Cash Green, who is currently serves as a superintendent for the schools of Palmetto Unified School District within the South Carolina Department of Corrections. Dr. Cash has served as an educator for over 30 years in the following positions: a teacher, assistant principal, executive director, chief and instructional officer, and superintendent. She has also served an adjunctive professor for both Webster and Clifton University as presented on the national level within and here's Dr. Cynthia Cash.
Thank you. So let me see here. Something is not happening. Okay, there we go. Let me get to, how do I get to the full screen here?
Look at either the top or the bottom of your screen. You should see the full to the bottom. And you should see the thing that looks like a screen, all the way to the bottom to the right.
Okay, I just had to move some things around. Thank you. So let's talk about, first of all, let me thank you for the opportunity to share with you some specifics regarding educating the incarcerated. Palmetto Unified School District actually serves only students or inmates in South Carolina Department of Corrections across the state. So we are statewide. Currently we have 21 schools. We have 11 EFA schools, and that serves students 17 to 21 who traditionally would be in a regular high school. And then we serve those inmates who volunteer to work towards their GEDs as an alternative certification or diploma. I know that you've heard from the other presenters basically what restorative justice is, but I want to take a look quickly at a few words, and that is the approach to justice. I also would like us to take a look at addressing the harm, which you've heard already. And then I want us to take a look at holding the offender responsible, holding the offender responsible. And then lastly, I want us to look at the parties that are directly affected by the crime. The other part that I want to share is that this whole process is to help the two parties to come to understand the harm. And that is basically developing an understanding, not necessarily accepting, but understanding the harm that was actually committed. So then, when does restorative justice begin for the inmate? And as a part of our instructional program, restoration really begins the day an inmate enters prison. The employees must be trained to provide an environment conducive to support change. And we're talking about change, we're talking about how do we then get the inmate or the student inmate to begin to understand what has happened and how it has impacted the victim. SCDC has 3 focus areas in its vision, and that is safety, service, and stewardship. Well, you don't see the word restorative justice, but if we begin to look at service, under service, we do have a victims advocate department who works directly with those individuals, particularly those who want to engage in conversations with the victim. Be mindful that in some cases, the whole restoration process and interacting with the victim is usually voluntary. This sometimes takes months, up to years, 2 years, to prepare both parties for this interaction. We must also understand that this interaction can end at any time. While the preparation may occur over a period of time, if the inmate or the victim decides that they do not want to go forward with it, it stops. So it's basically a voluntary process. The institutions must also be designed to support the change in inmates, and that change actually is specific to the crime, which really should involve goal setting. Typically, one does not understand the process or engage in the process unless they know exactly where they're going and every step of the way, how this takes place and what does he or she will need to do in order that this may occur. So let's talk a little bit about the environment that promotes change. You've heard about punitive punishment versus reformation or reform. Well, we deal with a lot of things that one may begin to think in terms of the punitive side of it. We deal with the lockdowns. We deal with revoking of privileges. And those privileges are as simple as taking advantage of or visiting the canteen to purchase items that they feel that they will need. Sometimes the punishment is simple as and showers where you can't leave because of at this time you may be or pose a danger to someone that you may be depending upon to help you to take advantage of the very basic things that you need. And then looking beyond the exterior individual, many people see the prisoner first, and that is all that we see sometimes. We fail to look beyond the fact that this is a human being who has committed an error against a community, an individual, society, and sometimes it prevents us from moving forward. Also offering opportunities to accept the crime against the society and then creating a desire to reform. These are things that will help us within the environment that we currently exist to make it a better place. And then creating a relationship of trust and respect. One of the things I did not say as we get started, and that is, in order for us to provide the types of environment that an inmate need in order that he or she may reform, and that is we must first teach and train the employees, those who are interacting with those, with the inmates, student inmates. This is vital when we're talking about creating a relationship of trust and respect. Typically in training, you're taught you do not trust. And in most cases, very rarely are we taught to respect. But in developing a relationship in such that you might have provide a conducive environment to move forward, this must exist. You must have trust. There must be mutual respect. Effective restorative justice programs which targets the specific crimes. So we're talking about examining the current offerings for inmates to include sensitivity classes. There has to be sensitivity classes provided for our employees as such that we begin to understand. Examine the intensive work prior to reentry, revisit those services that we provide. And I've heard the presenter from Charleston with the Catholic environment talking about providing those things that an inmate would definitely need in order that he or she is successful upon reentry. Driver's license, ID, social security card, all of those things. But there comes a time when we have to reassess, make an assessment of those programs to see if we're effective and that we're providing in an efficient manner. Focus on rehabilitation. Document, involve the inmate in this process. And I talked about goal setting. Engage the inmate in the process towards reentry, towards restitution, towards reformation. Educate employees, as I said earlier, to safely interact with inmates. and then design programs specific to the individual needs of the inmate. Typically, we have a very generic program, and everyone engages in the same programs that we believe will provide them with return to society. However, there comes a time when we have to focus on the individual needs of the inmates. This is an article that I thought was very beneficial for me. According to Muller, his name was Robert Muller. 2021, it was produced or published, and the title was "We Need Restorative Justice for Crime Victims." And this statement was there, which caught my attention. It says, these programs help perpetrators gain an insight into the impact that their crimes had on victims. Moreover, it allows them to reflect on a situation where the same offense could be committed against someone they love dearly. It puts them in a different perspective of the person who committed the crime and allows them to become more sensitive to people around them. And this is a part of the restorative justice process. I want to share with you just quickly, briefly. We administer surveys to our students in school. And this is through our State Department of Education. And so these are some of the results that have assisted us in how do we actually approach and our tactics in educating. And as behavioral, as you can see, 58.3% strategically are compliant, whereas 41% commit themselves in a ritual level. And this is what we see traditionally. Cognitively, 51% of our students immerse themselves, and 67% strategically compliant or cognitively. 80% retreat from disengagement. Whether or not this is a part of how we teach inmates to conduct themselves while in prison, it impacts how they also engage themselves in education. Emotionally, 53% or 51% of our students commit themselves to invest themselves, but take on a ritual compliance behavior. And then they equally, 50%, retreat and or rebel. Justice, jail or prison. According to the article, it only suppresses immediate behavior. But in order to prevent crime, we need to look at the cause of the behavior and treat the cause. I want to thank you for your time. I wanted to make this brief. Any questions, I'll be more than happy to try to answer those at the end. Thank you so much.
Hi, we're a little bit over, but we have one more person, Dr. Kimmel, who's going to make a brief statement. And if you can stay for a few minutes to answer some questions, ask some questions of the panelists. And it will be recorded, so you can go back in to see the remainder of the program if you are unable to stay.
All right, I'm going to be introducing Dr. TJ Kimmel. He is a political science instructor at Midlands Technical College. He received his PhD from the University of South Carolina in 2019. His teachings and scholarly interests are American national and state governments broadly, with a specific focus on judicial and government legitimacy. He has been teaching at Midlands Tech since 2014 and started as full-time faculty in 2017.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you to the other panelists on this very interesting and informative panel this morning. And thanks to Avetta for inviting me. I have a pretty brief presentation to share with all of you. Let me set up my screen here. Let's see. So today I'm just going to be talking about sort of how restorative justice looks and exists around the national political dialogue. Let me go full screen here. There we go. So as we've seen today, and as Susan mentioned, right, this is a lot of grassroots activity, right? We're seeing a lot of these things happen at the grassroots level, at the city level, at the county level, somewhere at the state level. And so in the national political dialogue, the term restorative justice is still sort of emerging. And so there's not much of a crystallization about what it means nationally, but I dug into a little bit about how the things stand on that. Today, we've seen both political parties are increasingly supportive of criminal justice reform. For example, the First Step Act passed in 2018 included huge bipartisan majorities with elements of restorative justice in things like sentencing reform. Like I said, though, however, restorative justice as a broader kind of concept remains for now an emerging topic in the national political discourse, even though, as you can see, it is something that is very active and engaged at the local level, which, considering how polarized national politics can be right now, is a good thing, right? Having that sort of situation. I went through and looked at the 2020 and 20 Republican and Democratic platforms and did a search for restorative justice just to see how that term is showing up. Here you can see the 2016 and 2020 Republican platform use the same language, and they talk about restorative justice to make the victim whole and put the offender on the right path. They're talking about that from the criminal justice perspective. In the 2020 Democratic platform, they talked about it more in the perspective of education, right? So a much larger or broader perspective on restorative justice beyond just the criminal justice aspects that we focused on today, right? There are other elements of it as well in other parts of governing policy. And so here the Democratic platform is referencing it with regard to Native American boarding schools and how those have caused generational trauma, right? And so that's an additional element to that concept, at least in the national discourse. So as we see here, this is elements of restorative justice are appearing in both parties' efforts to reform the criminal justice system, and a lot of what we're seeing at the local level as well. And then elements outside of criminal justice are more prevalent in the Democratic platform. There's been debates around restorative justice in the K through 12 education system. One example of that was at the Republican National Convention in 2020, a father of a child who had died in a high school shooting talked about how he thought that the gunman was released from more strict punishment because of restorative justice practices. So there is a debate around that with that aspect of it, going all the way back to the Obama administration, where they implemented more things like that in the K through 12 education system. And so taken all together here, and I don't want to spend too much time on any of this because I know we're over time. So the terminology restorative justice is not used as broadly in contemporary national political dialogue for now. It continues to emerge, though, as a larger and larger concept. And we're seeing it arise in a lot of policy areas. And so some of the more positive aspects of restorative justice, the less it's spoken about in that national sort of sense, the less polarized it can be, which is a good thing for the cause nationally. And so with that, I will wrap up and hand it back to Ovetta.
Thank you, TJ, and all the panelists. Dr. Abercrombie is going to kind of moderate the questions. I saw a few in there. Wes, you want to?
Sure. As Professor Lee says, I am now your chat monkey. So I've gone through them, kept track of the questions. A lot of these questions, as they were put up, as I asked them to be when they occurred to the attendees, were actually answered in the presentations. So I picked out 3 major ones. If I don't get to your question or it hasn't already been answered, please just repost it and be patient with me. First one, how do you identify which situations and people that would be appropriate for a restorative justice approach? Anyone? I think that's a general panel question.
I can answer from how we receive referrals from various sources. During our intake with people who have been referred to us for restorative justice, we do ask them to tell their story and listen for them taking responsibility. Because the restorative justice process that we offer that helps them to understand how to make amends and how to repair the harm, the first step really is them taking responsibility for their actions. If we get a case from the court where there is a plea bargain and we're asking them to tell their truth, that's really difficult. And it's very hard for people who have been told in court, no, tell them this is what happened and plea this way. When really what in the community wants to hear is, what really happened? What was the truth of what was going on? So until they're ready to do that, they're not ready for a restorative process in our eyes.
I would like to also interject. As I said, our programs are actually within the prisons. So certain men and women are referred to us. And through our initial conversation with them, they choose us. We don't choose them. If they're ready to address the issues that we have kind of formulated that are pertinent to restoring their lives and regaining some engagement with community, if they come to us and say, we want to go through your program, then we accept them. It's no question about it. We accept them and we provide that direct one-on-one mapping to help them identify where they need to start, because no two people will have the same level of need. So it's really based on the person that is in need of that support. And that's in the prison. For the people who come to our doors here within the city of Columbia, if they're just coming for a basic need that needs to be met, they don't have an ID, so they can't be housed. We do engage them in the conversation about, okay, where are you with the next step, the next level? It's not just about getting your ID. How prepared are you to take the next step? So the conversation really determines who we engage with in regards to restorative justice.
I'd also like to say one quick thing.
I'm sorry, Professor, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I also want to point out, and I don't think that it's necessarily clear, is that there are also ways to engage in restorative justice that don't involve the state at all. And there are practices that operate completely outside the state. So to the extent that we're asking who can even begin the program, there are all sorts of different rules if you're attached to the state system, but when you're outside the state, it's often just who's showing up and who's asking. That being said, I want to echo what Susan Cherry said, which is that, after that, the real question is, are you ready to take accountability? Because if you can't do that, then this is not going to be a successful process.
All right. I'm hearing over and over again the theme of what we call in sociology and criminology, accepting some level of blameworthiness for the event as being a primary characteristic you look for. Does the degree of offense, the level of damage done by the individual, or the character of the offense eliminate anyone from your programs?
No.
That's pretty well unanimous then.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Next major question. This is a relatively new approach with a current 14% effectiveness rate. Do you think its impact will increase? Anyone?
We've got a 35% effectiveness rate that we studied in Vermont.
It's hard to measure in comparison to state government, but right now the recidivism rate is really what we look at. The recidivism rate, the general rate of recidivism for South Carolina is between 25 to 33%. And currently for the 2,000 plus people that we work with, our rate of recidivism is right under 2%. And it's not what we're doing. It's giving them the tools that they need to build their own lives. So when they aren't living on the street, they're more inclined to be more accountable. When they have the proper credentials so they can be employed and so they can get actual services, be it for mental health or whatever, because a lot of them were going through programs for mental health counseling or through the Otis or whatever, but couldn't get into programs because they didn't have their basic credentials. So once we get them to secure their foundations, they tend to do much, much better because then they can build their own lives with us serving as a support system.
Two more questions. And Dr. Cashgreen, some of my students sent questions in because they could not attend from other sections. One of the questions they asked was, what is the average age of those who may come into a program such as yours?
So we service anyone who comes in ages 17 to 21. Recently, we have been doing a lot of analysis of their transcripts. And they're averaging 19 to 20, which really has an impact on whether or not we believe that we have the time to help them to finish what they've started in high school. Mm-hmm. So we look at time they have served, how many credits they have, and there's one other piece. And then that helps us to determine the pathway that we actually place them. We have high school students who are directed towards a GED track because of the fact that they do not have enough time to finish the high school diploma. But ironically, we have a lot of students who come in, well, we have few who come in and they only lack like 2 credits. In the past, they've actually been directed towards a GED. We have since made that change and we help them to finish their degree.
Oh, great. Wes, you have a...
I'd like to just share that restorative justice practices is being used throughout the school systems. And we're using them from kindergarten all the way through, because helping students learn that they are part of, not separate from, is really a critical piece of what restorative justice is about. And we have divided our restorative practices teaching in the school system into tier 1, which is a universal. Everybody belongs in circle. Everybody is part of. But we're also building the capacity in the school system to keep people within their school learning community so that they can repair harm within that school community rather than being sent out for somebody else to look at that harm. And that's a really big component of the restorative practices continuum, that multi-tiered system of supports is keeping people engaged within their learning community rather than sending them out. And that school to prison pipeline, which you see that system of moving people away from their community, is what we've seen from years and years and years and years. You two are not getting along, then don't look at each other, right? Rather than teaching the skills of relationship building. And so we're trying to keep people together, keeping people within their community and helping communities to learn how to repair harm, learning to have people figure out the skills that they need to make it within their school communities.
For us working in the community, the youngest has been 18, the oldest has been 81. The median age is about 45 to 46. It's across the entire spectrum, socioeconomic spectrum. Age is not a factor, race is not a factor. Everyone is affected by this.
Wes, is that the last question you had? One more, then after this one, we'll close. Wes, you're muted.
Sorry, I know we've gone over and people are having to drop out, but just a few more. Just a comment on my part to Mr. Grimble, Director Grimble. I mean, a 2%, that's an incredible result. I mean, nationally we're running and we're lumping different types of crimes into one typology, which can be misleading, but it's hovering around 30%. And so South Carolina in some cases can drop well below that, like you said, but 2% in social sciences, that's what we call significant. And it's very impressive. What are the qualifications for becoming involved in a restorative justice program? What kind of characteristics and skill sets do you look for in the people you involve in your programs?
We have 95 volunteers that are part of our program, and we do a lot of training. A lot of that training is about listening, learning how to listen deeply, to listen from the heart, to not hold judgment, to be able to ask good questions. Part of what I teach people when we're learning about restorative justice is that it's all about asking the right question in order to get the conversation that needs to happen. So it's really about how do we ask a good question, not how do you give advice, because we're not in it for the advice. We're in it for helping people to have the conversation that needs to happen.
Is that it, Wes?
Yeah, I know we're really going over. We have more questions, but I'm not going to exploit or tax anyone else's good nature. So I'm going to turn it back over to Veta now.
I can't say how appreciative I am, our department is, Midland Tech is, for you all willing to participate in this event. It's another gold star that we began on Monday. I'm sorry we ran a little bit over time, but for those who may still be on, and panelists too, we'll be having a Facebook Live at 5 o'clock today. And again, I must reiterate, it will be recorded. And I shall close and say thank you from the bottom of my heart, and hope you have the rest of your day. Great.
Thank you.
Thank
My
you.
apologies again.
That's okay. It was wonderful. Okay. Okay, bye-bye.